Emma Vigeland, Sam Seder, Majority Report. Joining us now, Osita Nwanevu. He is a contributing editor at The New Republic, columnist at The Guardian, author of the upcoming book, The Right of the People, Democracy and the Case for a New American Founding, coming out in March. Is that right?
Coming out in August, actually.
Oh, in August.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
can we
later in the
pre-order
year,
yet?
but you can right now.
Should we? What's the best?
Absolutely.
All right.
I will be urging people to do so an annoying number of times between now and August, but you can right now.
Happy to help in that endeavor.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with this. Donald Trump was sentenced today, and this is in the hush money case. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice is sort of, I guess, waiting on a couple of days to release the report, at least one of the reports by Jack Smith on the January 6th, essentially coup attempt, in my opinion. And perhaps we will see at least parts of the documents case. But I was struck in this sentencing today where Judge Machon said that essentially Trump getting what is it called? I don't even remember now. Getting the
unconditional discharge.
Getting an unconditional discharge was the only lawful sentence that the judge could impose under the circumstances. Those circumstances are that the Supreme Court has basically said he's above the law, or he's not above the law. It's just that he can't be held accountable for any law breaking that he does. What are the implications of this in terms of I think Trump feels, it mars his history books, I guess, a little bit, but it's also got a signal to him I'm pretty golden.
Yeah. I mean, if Trump doesn't already feel that way for a million other reasons, then then there's something wrong. I mean, I think Trump's been given a lot of reasons over the course of his political career so far to think that he is above the law. They think that he's not going to be held accountable by our institutions. That just seems to be the way the things have worked out for him in general. I mean, myself, I knew as soon as he won the election that all these legal cases were going to fizzle out in this kind of a way. People had a lot of expectation, I think, before the election that the Manhattan trial and the other things he had on the docket were going to hurt him with the electorate in ways that never really bore out. So, I think that Trump has to have the understanding now, has to have already had the understanding that he's kind of unbound by our institutions, that there haven't really been ways in which they've succeeded in reining him in. I always remember after, I think, he was impeached, he gave this speech, I think it was at CPAC or some other event, where he was talking about how the impeachment process, many people were writing, was going to rein him in. And he was like, no, actually, I got worse. I was emboldened by my ability to sort of get off here. And I don't know, I think I, like many Americans who've been following this, feel kind of cynical about our capacity to do anything. It seems to sort of dial Trump's power back, to rein him in as though he were a normal person under the law. That doesn't seem to be a thing that's ever been operative for Donald Trump.
All right, so that's in terms of Trump's perspective on this. What does it say? What's your sense of where the American public is on this, broadly speaking? Because it feels like the reaction from the American public is important in terms of these accountability questions. Maybe, well, not maybe. I think definitely more so than Donald Trump's. What's striking is that there's a blasé quality to this.
Yeah. Well, all the polls that I've seen on, whether it's January 6th, whether it's a hush money trial, whatever the particular case on the in the news happens to be, you usually get majorities or at least pluralities of the American people saying, yeah, we think Donald Trump did something wrong here. it's not the case that you have this kind of huge proportion of Americans who think that Donald Trump is being wronged and that these cases are unfair. Republicans think that, but the general public has always sort of understood Trump as a kind of a crook, somebody who's not playing by the rules. But obviously, I think that we can credit the result of the election in November to the fact that that's not a deal breaker for a lot of Americans. I think that a lot of Americans kind of take it for granted that we have a legal system in which wealthy people aren't treated the same way as ordinary people. It's just something that Donald Trump did not create, but is sort of representative of. And I think that there's a cynicism about it. A lot of Americans who said, look, we know that Donald Trump is a crook. We know that he has all these ways that he runs up against or undermines our institutions. But, I don't really respect our legal system. I don't really respect our institutions. And
Right.
so, there are other things that are going to be more important to me in this election. And I'm going to vote for him or consider voting for him on that basis, unfortunately. So, I think there's a lot of cynicism about the extent to which our institutions can rein wealthy and powerful people in. And I think there are a lot of people who say, hell, if this is the way the system works, might as well get like a wealthy, powerful person who dislikes the same people I like, or who's entertaining, or doesn't seem to follow, the same kind of political norms as everybody else does. Maybe you should just throw in with that guy. If the people who actually prevail in the system aren't ordinary people, but choose your preferred billionaire or millionaire to advocate for your interests.
Or it's that he is hated by the people that I hate, right? I mean,
Exactly, yeah.
we're later in our show, I'm sure we'll play some of the footage from the Jimmy Carter funeral in the Capitol. And, to see how Bush doesn't acknowledge Trump, but Obama's sitting there and palling around with him. And, I do think that at the core, and I didn't see this, I think, at the time fully during the Harris campaign, is the embrace of Liz Cheney for a voting population that's going to be making decisions about voting for Trump based on less information. We know that he won over lower information voters or people who don't consume political news regularly or primarily get it from social media. The people that know that Liz Cheney didn't think that Trump won the election in 2020 are 100% of those people are voting for Kamala Harris. But when you have the Cheney name and then you have the Bushes, and Trump came on the political scene mocking Jeb Bush, and he helped kill that political dynasty and went after the Iraq War. He's hated by both Democrats and establishment Republicans. And I think that may be one of the big core things that core elements of his appeal for that voting population that carried him over the finish line.
Yeah, I think that there are some Americans, as you say, who feel nothing but antipathy for the Cheney name. They remember the Bush administration, remember being lied to about Iraq, and so Liz Cheney in their minds is a villain. I think that's true of a certain constituency of Americans. But I also think there are many more Americans who sort of saw those ads and saw the messaging about Liz Cheney and were just like, who is this and why should I care? This seems like another institutional figure. I don't necessarily know who Liz Cheney is, but this person we're trotting out saying, Trump is breaking all of those rules, is whoever they are, stand-in for politics as usual, and we don't think politics as usual really works. And there's nothing that sort of makes us deferential to the system of values that Liz Cheney is being trotted out to uphold, So it was either, to my mind, people who saw that messaging and who were repulsed by it actively, and also on the other hand, people who saw the messaging and just sort of saw it as kind of irrelevant and not pertinent to their concerns that actually motivated them in the election. Either way, it was a loser. I think we can say that pretty definitively. And the fact that people invested so much energy and time on the Democratic side, the strategists who thought it was going to unlock the suburbs and unlock this hidden constituency for Republican voters. And we all know that that wasn't true. And people were saying it wasn't going to happen, before the election. I just, there was so much about the election that was not a surprise. I think it was, there were people who disbelieved all the information that we had coming from the polls, and there are people who just told themselves a kind of fantastical story about what most Americans were going to care about come November. yeah, there's just a lot of delusion that it's even now, months after the fact, easy for me to get kind of angry and annoyed thinking about.
Well, let's get you a little bit more angry and annoyed and talk
Sure.
about how the Democrats are reacting presently. I mean, I think, I think we're going to come to find, and there's, I'm starting to see some data that basically says, this was not about people voting for Biden and voting for Trump. I think there was a similar amount of people who defected from Biden to Trump that defected from Trump to Biden. Relatively speaking, a small percentage of that, but there were about 19 million voters, if you account for like how the electorate has expanded, that didn't show up, that should have showed up or had showed up in 2020 to vote against Donald Trump, and voted for Biden, and didn't show up this time around to vote, in part because what the campaign was offering was not inspiring enough to them, or maybe they stayed home because they were upset about what was going on with Gaza, or maybe they stayed home because the Cheney fed into the Gaza narrative. I mean, it could have been any of those things, but the bottom line is there was a massive cohort of people who were not, who should have showed up, or at least were gettable at least 4 years ago and didn't show up. The Democrats seem to have taken to the extent that the Democrats as a entity can take a lesson, and I'm skeptical of that. But individual Democrats seem to have taken bought into an idea that they should capitulate and sort of like meet Trump halfway in some way. I mean, I'm talking about like the ICC is not the terribly different vote than we had in the House, but this immigration bill is reprehensible, and it's going to pass in the Senate now. You only had about, was it 8 or 9 Democrats who voted against cloture. Give me your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats now, I think Schumer included, are saying, well, we're going to amend the bill. It's not the final bill and so on. We're just voting to advance it, and we'll have like a conversation, a debate about it. This is not a bill that should have advanced. It is from top to bottom, fully and thoroughly reprehensible. And in general, beyond this bill, I think if we had a kind of reasonable and real opposition party in this country, you'd have people asking questions, well, why should we be making immigration policy with Donald Trump at all? Like, why aren't we spending all of our energy and all of our time trying to convince the American people that his message on immigration is wrong, that immigrants are good for our society, and trying to build up a majority in this country, again, for comprehensive immigration reform? That's what we should be doing, even beyond and above this bill. But, I can't say that I'm surprised that so many Democrats have found it easy to just sort of take the bait here, and just sort of capitulate in this kind of way. That's what Democrats, I think, tend to do when they lose, instead of trying to figure out how they can, advance their own message and counter the right in a more compelling way. They adopt the right wing's framing, and this is what this is what they did with the border bill last year. They thought it was going to unlock the election for them, right? So we voted for this big, bad, strong border bill. It was written by James Langford, and Donald Trump called Republicans and told them not to pass it, and that's bad because we're actually the candidates that want to strengthen the border. We care about the immigrants coming in and committing these crimes, and it did not work at all, not even slightly.
This is Obama's. This was Obama's formula too, though, right? I mean, his whole thing was, I'm going to show you how many people I can deport. Right. Did in fact deport more people than Donald Trump did. 100%. And I'm going to show you, and that's going to open up, that's going to unlock this thing. It is, they are fighting a sort of like some type of like rear guard. They're fighting exclusively a rear guard battle, and assuming this is the way they move forward. It's just bizarre. But with that said, it worked for Obama as an individual, and you've got senators out there who are clearly sort of making a calculation, what's going to work for me as an individual. And I mean, this seems like a total failure of leadership at the top of the Democratic Party. I don't even know which leader to blame. Like, who is it that's even, like leading this? You know, does Obama do it in between, pitches of like TV scripts, or what's happening here?
No, I mean, the leadership materializes whenever the left seems like it's able to win, maybe, once you start winning some primaries, once, it seems like progressives are getting the upper hand in some way, then this kind of deep and strong internal party infrastructure manifests itself immediately, and things happen, absent that kind of threat to the established order of things in the Democratic Party, it doesn't seem like there is a lot of leadership. It is kind of everybody trying to fend for themselves in these very craven and predictable ways. I think Ruben Gallego in Arizona is a perfect example of this. Gallego, I remember what sticks out about him most strongly in my mind is that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he came out very strongly for banning all Russian students from the United States, kicking all of them out as a response to Putin's invasion, saying, these are all the kids of these rich oligarchs who are, supporting Vladimir Putin, and they should all be punished as retaliation, which was stupid and horrible, and a capitulation to a kind of Trumpism. This was years ago, and I remember thinking to myself, this tells you exactly who this person is, and it illustrates too this impulse in the Democratic Party to always respond by trying to make yourself seem like you're going to outdo the right at being the right? And that's exactly what Gallego, in particular, is doing now. I mean, he said that he wants to sponsor the Riley Act, not just vote for it, but he's backing it to the hilt. So I mean, I think that he is indicative of this broader kind of mentality that you're talking about. That Democrats, for every reason, think that the solution is always, we seem weak, and we don't seem muscular enough on this issue, so we need to become more reactionary. And if we do that, we're going to peel away these voters. And it doesn't work. All you're doing is reifying and solidifying the right's basic framing of the world. And if you do that, people who are concerned about immigration on that basis are going to turn to the right. They're not going to choose the weak sauce version of Donald Trump. They're going to choose the actual thing. And the other thing I think about here too is that the current place we're in on immigration didn't come about by accident. Republicans worked really hard over the last decade or so to change public opinion on immigration. I remember back in, I guess it was in middle school or whatever when the 2008 election happened, but Tom Tancredo, running the Republican primary that year.
Osita,
sorry, I didn't mean to. But just
I think Emma was born then.
Right. But just to give people a sense of like the long-term trajectory here, people laughed at Tom Tancredo. This is years before Trump. This is not the kind of immigration politics that has any future in the Democratic Party. Look, even George W. Bush has been backing comprehensive immigration reform. This is a bipartisan thing and so on. And Republicans, Donald Trump included, but not exclusive to him, have done a lot of legwork to try to get people to blame immigrants for the structural problems we face in American society. There's a point under Trump where it didn't seem like this was going to work. Actually, the implementation of his policies generates this backlash and actually increases the number of people who say they support immigration. But after he leaves office, there is this kind of argumentative vacuum. You have Republicans who are busing migrants over to Democratic cities that they know are not going to be able to handle it in like a stable, orderly way, intentionally to try to get people angry. You have Republicans taking on or sort of taking up these stories, like the Laken Riley story, finding every example of an immigrant committing a crime they can think of and blowing that up and elevating it, out of the faith that if they just kept at it and they kept bludgeoning the political discourse, they would eventually generate a majority of Americans who would oppose or who would support Trump's immigration policies, especially in the absence of a strong counterargument for Democrats. And I say all of that to just sort of make the broader point that Democrats don't believe you can do this. I don't think I've ever seen in my entire life a concerted effort by the Democratic Party to actively change public opinion on an issue 100%. That they're losing on,
Can you imagine?
I can cite a half a dozen. I mean, I just like the amazing, like, I'll just add to that. Like, I think it was reported that Obama, in his pivot to austerity in 2010, said, I'm not going to try and explain to people that the deficit's not, important now. And then 7 years later, the deficit completely evaporates as an issue for Republicans. I'll also add, just to emphasize your point here, in terms of George Bush, in I think it was 04 or 05, tried to do that comprehensive immigration plan because Karl Rove had basically told him we need to get Latino voters, and it was like talk radio, frankly. Mark Levin and Laura Ingraham that really, and others who really ended up canning that entire, damaging Bush significantly in that fight. And this has been something they've been doing for a long time. But
they recognize that public opinion is malleable. I mean, the people did that because they had this faith that if we sort of hone in on the right ways to talk about this issue, we'll get people on our side. And that's exactly what Democrats should be doing now in the opposite direction. What can we do to actually repair people's faith in immigration, to convince people that they're assets to society? And the absence of any of that is really, it's terrible to think about. It's terrible that we're in the middle of this era now, 10 years into Donald Trump, without any kind of real robust effort by the part of people who are supposed to be the opposition to counter this message in a strong way. And it just sort of signals the ways in which I don't think Democrats really believe in politics.
But I just want to make this point because before I lose it, because Osita, you made this about how the Republicans will pick every story to make their case, like Lake and Riley. Can you imagine if the Democrats did that for every person that was killed because their claim was denied, or because if they decided to make a John Miller act because he had cancer and couldn't afford the bills and became bankrupt, 100%. That is what doing politics would be for their agenda. But instead, we're 10 years after Donald Trump has come onto the political scene, where there were protests at airports at the beginning of 2017 to protest the Muslim ban. This is xenophobia. This is racist.
Right.
Where are we at 10 years later? We're about to pass the Lake and Riley Act to help the Republicans demonize immigrants more.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.